Chapter 1. The Notice. The notice of closure had been written 3 weeks before it was needed. This was, the Marquess of Rothwell considered, entirely efficient. He had asked his solicitor, Mr. Hartley, to prepare the document in advance so that the Rothbury visit, 2 days at most, 3 if the roads were poor, could be concluded without delay. He would inspect the foundation, satisfy himself that the inspection had been thorough enough to be legally defensible, confirm that the endowment was insufficient to sustain ongoing operations, and instruct Hartley to file the paperwork. His late mother had established the Rothbury Foundation 11 years ago, in the 3rd year of her widowhood, with the particular energy of a woman who had finished grieving and had decided to do something with the energy left over. She had endowed a school for the children of coal miners and agricultural labourers in a Durham village, funded a small lending library, and arranged for a teacher to be employed at a salary that had been adequate in 1802 and had not, as salaries established by a deceased patron's estate tended not to, adjusted since. The foundation's endowment had been generating income at a rate that was no longer sufficient to cover those salaries, plus the building's maintenance, plus the cost of materials, and the shortfall had been growing by small increments for 3 years. The closure was a practical decision. It was not, he was aware, a pleasant one. But Rothwell had not become one of the wealthiest peers in the north of England by avoiding practical decisions on the grounds that they were unpleasant. He arrived in Rothbury on a Wednesday in September with Hartley and a change of horses, and took rooms at the King's Head, and sent a message to the foundation informing them of his intention to inspect the premises on Thursday morning. The reply came back within the hour. It was written in a clear, firm hand on paper that was not expensive but was very clean. My Lord, the children and staff of the Rothbury Foundation are available for inspection at any time convenient to your lordship. We open at 8 o'clock. The school will be in session and the children in attendance. If it would be helpful, I can prepare a summary of the Foundation's current activities and expenditures for your review. Miss Agnes Birch, schoolmistress. Hartley read this over his shoulder. Efficient, he said. She knows why we are here, Rothwell said. Most likely, Hartley agreed. Shall I prepare the... Not yet. He looked at the letter again, the clear, firm hand, the absence of any of the forms of appeal he had been expecting, the pleading, the invocation of his late mother's memory, the various emotional instruments that people in Miss Birch's position typically deployed when facing closure. Thursday at 9, he said. We will see what there is to see. The foundation building was on the east side of the village green. A plain stone building of modest dimensions that had been built, he could see from the quality of the work, with more care than money. The pointing was recent. The windows were clean. The roof, which he examined with the professional eye of a man who owned 14 properties and had opinions about roof lines, appeared sound. He arrived at 9 with Hartley and a notebook and the pre-written closure notice folded in his breast pocket. The door was open. He could hear the children before he entered. Not the undifferentiated noise of children in disorder. The specific sound of children engaged in something, the question and answer cadence of a lesson in progress, punctuated by the occasional voice of the teacher asking something, and the varied responses of many small mouths attempting the answer simultaneously. He stepped into the doorway. There were 37 children in the room. He would count them later and confirm the number, but his first impression was of a room very full of small people who were, against all expectation, paying attention. They were arranged on benches, boys on one side, girls on the other, with the exception of 3 boys at the back, who appeared to have drifted slightly toward the girls' side, and had either not been noticed or had been permitted as a social experiment. The slates on the desks showed arithmetic. The arithmetic, as far as he could see from the doorway, was being attempted with genuine effort. The teacher had her back to him. She was speaking to a girl of perhaps 9 who had raised her hand and speaking in the tone of a person who is receiving a question that requires a real answer rather than the simplified version. Rothwell stood in the doorway and waited, because interrupting a lesson for the convenience of an inspection struck him as inefficient, and he watched the teacher explain, not the girl, and watched the girl's expression move from uncertainty into the specific satisfaction of understanding, and thought, "She is good at this." Then the teacher turned. Agnes Birch was perhaps 28, with a face that was in the process of becoming more interesting as she aged, rather than less, strong-boned, direct, with grey eyes that assessed him in the doorway with the speed and thoroughness of a woman who had been assessing adults all her working life and had become efficient at it. She was not what he had expected. He was not, his expression probably communicated, what she had expected either. What she did with this mutual surprise was instructive. She said, in a voice designed for 37 children that was pitched, for his benefit, at precisely the level required. "Children, please continue with the third column. I will return in a moment." And then she came to the doorway and said, in a different voice, professional, direct, entirely composed, "Lord Rothwell, I am Agnes Birch. Please come in." "Thank you," he said. "I thought you might prefer to observe before we speak," she said. "The children are more themselves when an adult is not examining them." She looked at him with the grey eyes. "As, I find, are most people." He had the slight sensation of a man who has entered a room expecting to conduct an inspection and has found himself being assessed. He was not accustomed to this sensation. He was not certain whether he found it irritating or interesting. "Please," he said, gesturing for her to lead. She took him through the room, past the arithmetic slates, past the bookshelf at the far end that held the lending library's overflow, past the map of England pinned to the wall with small flags marking places the children had studied. She showed him the materials with the matter-of-fact quality of a woman who has nothing to hide and has organized accordingly, and she explained, in complete and unprompted sentences, what was being taught and why, and to what result. Rothwell listened. He asked questions. She answered them without the defensive elaboration of someone managing the inspection and without the false modesty of someone concealing competence. She answered them accurately. At the end of the room, in the corner where the younger children sat with a different set of materials, a boy of perhaps 6 was staring at Rothwell with the open fascination of a child who has not yet learned to perform indifference. "That is Thomas Bewley," Agnes Birch said, without looking. "He is 6, and he is very interested in new people. Thomas, this is Lord Rothwell." Thomas Bewley considered Lord Rothwell with the gravity of 6. "Are you very rich?" he said. "Thomas," Agnes Birch began. "Moderately," Rothwell said. Thomas Bewley accepted this with the equanimity of a child satisfied by accurate information. He returned to his slate. Agnes Birch looked at Rothwell sideways, the first moment that was not professional assessment, and there was something in it that was, briefly, very nearly amusement. "He asks everyone," she said. "I assumed," he said. They concluded the tour in the small room at the back that served as her office, a desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf containing teaching materials, and 3 volumes of natural philosophy, and 1 novel he noted with a private curiosity he did not express. She had prepared the summary she had offered in her letter, 2 pages, clear and organized, setting out the foundation's current income and expenditure with the precision of someone who had been watching the numbers for 3 years and had made the best of them. He read it. It confirmed the shortfall. It also, in its own spare documentation, told a story about what had been done with the money that was available, not wasted, not comfortable, every shilling accounted for and directed toward the children. "The roof maintenance," he said. "This entry from last year. You had it done from the operating budget." "The endowment does not cover capital repairs," she said. "The operating budget was the only available source." "Which further reduced your margin for the current year?" "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "I am aware of what the numbers indicate, my lord. I have been aware for 2 years. Then you know why I am here." "I know why you believe you are here," she said. and there it was. Not aggressive, not performing bravery, simply the statement of a woman who had something to say and was going to say it. I wonder if you would permit me to show you something before we discuss the closure. He looked at her across the small desk. The children's work, she said, not the slates, the books. She produced from the shelf behind her a stack of composition books, children's handwriting on the covers, names in various states of legibility. This is what they have written this year, about their families, about the village, about what they know and what they want to know. I would like you to read some of them. She set them on the desk between them. Before you make your decision. He looked at the composition books. He looked at her. That, he said, is not a conventional presentation to an inspector. No, she said, it is not. She met his gaze without apology. But you are not a conventional inspector, my lord. You are the person who can decide whether this continues or ends, and I would like your decision to be made on the fullest available information. She paused. And I would like you, specifically, to read what Thomas Bewley wrote about the day he learned to read. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the composition books. He thought about the pre-written closure notice in his breast pocket, and the 2 days he had allocated to this business, and the drive back to his Yorkshire estate, and the other 14 properties, and the quarterly accounts, and the various matters of a large and prosperous life. He picked up the nearest composition book. Chapter 2. The Village. He read the composition books for an hour. Hartley, who had been waiting in the front room of the King's Head with the practised patience of a solicitor accustomed to his employer's occasional detours from efficient decision-making, received no message until midday, at which point a note arrived saying that the inspection was ongoing and that Thursday's return journey should be moved to Friday. Agnes Birch, who had returned to the classroom when Rothwell began reading and had conducted the remainder of the morning's lesson with her characteristic composure, found him still at the desk when she came to the office to collect the afternoon register. I have a question, he said. She sat down in her chair. Yes. The Bewley boy. He had found Thomas Bewley's composition book and had read it twice. It was 4 pages in the large, effortful hand of a 6-year-old, and it described the day he had understood that the marks on a page were sounds, and that sounds made words, and that words were the same words he already knew, and the sensation, described in the absolute concrete vocabulary of a child who cannot yet reach for metaphor and does not need to, of the world opening. It was like when the candle goes in the dark, only it was in my head. His father works the Bewley farm? His father is Matthew Bewley, she said. He farms 12 acres to the north of the village. He cannot read. His wife cannot read. 3 of Thomas's 4 older siblings cannot read. Thomas will be the first in his family. When did this foundation open? 11 years ago, she said. Your mother endowed it in 1802. How many children have passed through it in that time? She opened the register on the desk between them, not the current register, but an older one, kept with the same neat precision as everything else. In 11 years, 214 children have attended, she said. 46 of those are now employed in positions that require literacy. 7 have gone into trade and are keeping their own accounts. 2 are in service in households that employ only literate staff. She paused. 1 girl, Nell Hartley, has been recommended by her master for a position in a commercial office in Newcastle. That was last month. Nell Hartley, he said. He had read Nell Hartley's composition book. She was 12, and she had written about mathematics with the clarity of someone for whom numbers were a first language. She is the Foundation's best student, Agnes said. She is also the Foundation's best argument. She looked at him steadily. I am making that argument intentionally, my lord. I want you to know I am making it. I know, he said. I have been aware since the moment you handed me a child's composition book rather than a financial prospectus. He set Thomas Bewley's book down. It was effective. It was honest, she said. Which is different. He looked at her across the desk in the small office with the afternoon light coming through the single window, and thought about the difference between effective and honest, and thought about the closure notice in his breast pocket, and thought about 214 children in 11 years, and thought, with a specificity he did not usually permit in assessments of this kind, because specificity made decisions more complicated, about a candle going in the dark only in your head. "What would the shortfall require?" he said. She was very still for a moment. Then, with the controlled composure of a woman who has learned not to let herself believe things before they are confirmed. Annually, to sustain current operations and address the capital repair backlog. She named a figure. It was not large. It was the amount that, he noted, she had calculated to the nearest pound and had presumably been calculating for 2 years, and it was a number he could authorize before breakfast without examining the accounts. "I will consider it," he said. "That is more than I expected," she said, with the precision of a woman who does not perform gratitude for things that are not yet given. "You expected closure." "I expected closure," she confirmed. "And I intended to argue against it as fully as I was able, and then, if the argument failed, to find another means of continuing." She looked at the register. "I had a letter drafted to 3 possible donors. I was not simply waiting for your decision." "No," he said. "I did not think you were." He stood, which was the close of the business portion of the interview. "I will return tomorrow. I would like to see the afternoon session." She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because," he said, with a directness he did not usually employ in professional exchanges, "I have been making decisions about this foundation for an hour, and I have done so entirely on the basis of documents and 1 composition book, and 37 children I observed for 4 minutes. That is not sufficient information." He picked up his hat. "I do not make insufficiently informed decisions." Agnes Birch looked at him for a moment with the grey eyes that had been assessing him since the doorway and said, "The afternoon session begins at 1 o'clock. "I will be here at 1, he said. He went back to the King's Head and found Hartley and told him Friday's return was now moved to Saturday, and ate a solitary supper in the private dining room and read Thomas Bewley's composition book a 3rd time, and did not examine why he was doing this with any more rigour than the situation required. Chapter 3. The Foundation. He came back on Friday, and on Saturday, and on Sunday he attended the Rothbury church and sat 3 rows behind Agnes Birch and her Sunday class of children, who sang the psalm responses with the enthusiastic imprecision of children who genuinely wanted to and were not being managed. This was not the plan. The plan had been 2 days and a closure notice. The plan had been revised, in increments, by a series of specific things. Thomas Bewley's candle, Nell Hartley's arithmetic, 214 children in 11 years, and the specific quality of a woman who had said effective and honest are different things, and meant it from the same place she meant everything else, which was a place that was not managing anything. He was aware that his presence in Rothbury had become a social event. The village was not large, and he was not inconspicuous, and the King's Head's best private dining room was occupied by a Marquess who was supposed to have left on Thursday and had shown no signs of leaving. He was also aware that his extended presence was being interpreted by the village according to the available social script, which contained a limited number of plots, and only one of which accounted for a wealthy nobleman staying 5 days beyond his stated departure. He was not certain the village was wrong. On Monday morning he arrived at the foundation at 8, not 9, not at the civilized hour of an inspection, but at the opening hour, the hour when Agnes arrived and unlocked the building and set the fires and arranged the materials and did the 30 minutes of work that preceded the children and that no one, as far as he could determine, had ever witnessed, and found her in the act of writing the day's questions on the large slate at the front of the room. She heard him at the door and turned without the start of a woman caught at something private. She had, he had observed, a specific quality of unstartleability, the composure of a person who has arranged their interior life so thoroughly that the exterior rarely produced genuine surprise. "My lord," she said. "Miss Birch." He came into the room. "I wanted to speak with you before the children arrive." "You have made your decision," she said. It was not a question. "I have made my decision," he confirmed. He came to stand near the front of the room, which put him in the position she occupied when she taught, the slates and the benches and the small flags on the map. And the perspective was different from that position than from the doorway or the desk. It was the view of the room that she had every day, the 37 empty seats about to be filled. "The foundation will continue," he said. "The endowment will be increased to cover the current shortfall and the capital repair backlog. I will instruct Hartley to draw up the revised settlement this week." He paused. "I am also subject to further investigation, considering a permanent endowment revision that would eliminate the annual uncertainty. I want to review the legal structure before I commit to a specific arrangement." Agnes Birch stood at the front of her classroom in the September morning and said nothing for a moment. He watched her process it, not with the performed emotion of a woman performing gratitude, but with the specific controlled quality of a person allowing themselves to believe something they had been afraid to believe. "That is—" She stopped. She looked at the slate behind her, which read, "What do we know today that we did not know yesterday?" The question she apparently wrote every morning, which he had observed on all 4 days, and which was, he thought, the most precise summary of pedagogy he had ever encountered. "Thank you," she said, plainly. No elaboration, because elaboration would have been less than the plain word. "You are not going to tell me this is more than you hoped for," he said. "It is precisely what I hoped for," she said. "I did not hope for less." She met his gaze with the directness that was her most consistent quality. "I have been running this school for 4 years, and I have hoped, every year, for a patron who understood what it was. I did not reduce the hope simply because the patron had not yet arrived." He looked at her across the empty classroom. He had been in this room for 4 days, and had been in the company of this particular woman for 4 days, and had been conducting, with a rigour he applied to assessments he considered significant, an ongoing evaluation of what he was observing. The evaluation was complete. "Miss Birch," he said, "I have a question that is not about the foundation." She was still. "I intend to return to Rothbury," he said. "Not for the foundation, though I will have occasion to visit on that account. I intend to return because—" He stopped and identified the right word from several, "because I find that I have more to learn here than I anticipated, and that the instruction is of a quality I have not found elsewhere, and that I am reluctant to conclude it." He held her gaze. "That is, I am aware, an unusual statement from an employer to an employee. The endowment revision makes the employment relationship somewhat different," she said, with the precision she brought to propositions that required it. "When the foundation is independently endowed, I will no longer be employed by your estate." "Yes," he said, "I am aware of that." A pause. It was not accidental. The September morning light was coming through the clean windows of the foundation building, and the village was beginning its Monday sounds outside, and in 20 minutes 37 children would arrive and fill the 37 empty seats, and Agnes Birch stood at the front of her classroom and looked at the Marquess of Rothwell with the grey eyes that had been assessing him since he appeared in the doorway on Thursday morning. "You came here to close this school," she said. "Yes." "You have stayed 5 days." "Yes." "You have read the composition books and attended the afternoon sessions and come to the Sunday service and arrived this morning before the children." She said each thing with the deliberateness of a woman building an account from the evidence. "And now you are telling me you intend to return." "Yes," he said for the 3rd time. "For the instruction," she said. "Partly," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. 20 minutes had become 15. Outside, A child's voice was audible, not Thomas Bewley's, a different child, one he did not yet know, arriving early. "You should know," she said, "that I am a schoolmistress in a Durham village, and you are a Marquess, and the distance between those is considerable." "I am aware of the distance," he said. "I have been aware of it since Thursday morning, along with a number of other things, and I have found that the awareness of the distance has not altered my intention to return." "I am also not," she said, "a woman who will be managed, in any arrangement." She said it without apology, the statement of someone reporting a fact. "I have been managing this foundation on my own terms for 4 years, and I do not intend to stop being the person who does that." "I know," he said. "It is one of the things I find most—" He stopped, and the word he almost used was not the word he was prepared to use on a Monday morning 20 minutes before 37 children arrived, and he settled for instructive. Something happened in her face. Not the full expression, not yet, but the very beginning of something that was not composed and was not professional and was briefly, completely herself. "Come back then," she said. "On Thursday. The older children are doing geography. You may find it useful." "I will find it useful," he said, with a certainty that was not about geography. She returned to the slate, and he left the classroom as the first of the children appeared at the end of the green and went back to the King's Head and told Hartley to make the arrangements for a return visit in 2 weeks. And Hartley, who had been Rothwell's solicitor for 8 years and had seen him make decisions about his 14 properties with the clean efficiency of a man who did not revisit them, looked at him with the careful expression of a man who has identified a change in the weather and is noting it for the record. "The foundation," Hartley said. "The foundation," Rothwell confirmed, and did not elaborate, because Hartley was a solicitor and not a confessor, and the full account was still being written. Chapter 4. The Endowment. He came back on Thursday, as he had said, and the Thursday after that, and the one after that. October arrived, and then November, and Rothwell's visits to Rothbury had become, in the village's accounting, in Hartley's patient calendar management, and in the assessment of anyone who was paying attention, a fact of the fortnight rather than an event of the inspection. The Foundation's endowment revision was completed in October and signed in November. It was, in the language of legal documents, a permanent and irrevocable endowment sufficient to fund the Rothbury Foundation's operations in perpetuity, adjusted for increase of population and cost, administered by a board of trustees that included Agnes Birch as the founding trustee with permanent voting rights. This last provision had been added at his instruction, when Hartley had produced the first draft without it. Hartley had looked at him when he specified this addition. "A permanent vote," he said. "She built it," Rothwell said. "She should have the power to protect it." Hartley had made the amendment without further comment, which was how Hartley communicated approval. Agnes had received the final document with the same composure with which she received everything, the composure that was, he now understood, not absence of feeling, but the specific discipline of a woman who had learned to keep her interior life from being used against her. She had read the entire document before commenting, which had taken 20 minutes, and had then asked 3 precise questions about the administration clause, the investment provision, and the definition of sufficient, all of which were the right questions, and then had said, "This is sound." "I had it reviewed by 2 separate counsel," he said. "I know," she said. "I can see their comments in the margin. You kept none of their suggested reductions." She looked at him. "They suggested reducing the trustee provision." "They did," he said. "You did not reduce it." "No," he said. She looked at the document and then at him, and the composure was doing its work, but he had been watching for 4 months and he had learned to see beneath it. The specific signal, the slight shift in the grey eyes that indicated she was feeling something she had not yet decided what to do with. "Thank you," she said, for the second time, in the same plain register. "You are welcome," he said, "in the same register." She looked up. "I mean," he said, that the thanks is received as it is given, plainly, without the elaboration of either. He held her gaze. I am not in the habit of doing things for people because I expect gratitude. I am in the habit of doing things because they are right. The endowment is right. The trustee provision is right. I would like you to receive both without the mechanism of gratitude, because you have nothing to be grateful for beyond what is simply correct. Agnes Birch sat across the desk in the small office of the Rothbury Foundation and looked at the Marquess of Rothwell, who had arrived in September with a closure notice in his pocket and had been coming back every fortnight for 3 months, and said, "You have changed." "Since September?" "Since you arrived in the doorway," she said, "on Thursday morning. The man who stood in that doorway had already written the closure notice. He was here to complete a procedure." She looked at him steadily. That man would not have written the trustee provision. "No," he said, "he would not have." "What changed?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Thomas Bewley's candle," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He is 7 now. He told me last week that he is going to be a surveyor." "Because of the maps?" "Because of the maps," she confirmed. "He has decided the small flags are insufficient and has been making his own more detailed version on a sheet of cartridge paper." Something happened in her face that was the full expression, not the composed professional version, not the brief beginnings of the thing he had been watching for. The genuine one, warm and specific, the expression of a woman who loves her work and her students and is not concealing it. "It is quite good for a 7-year-old cartographer." He looked at her in the November office and thought about the first morning in the doorway and the 4 months since and the 37 children who were 40 in the new register because 3 more had arrived in October, and the composition books and the afternoon sessions and the geography lessons and all the accumulated evidence of a woman doing something real with the specific quality of someone who has not been pretending to do it. He thought about what he had been before September. Not bad, he did not think, but incurious in the specific way of a man who had arranged his life for efficiency and had not examined what efficiency was costing. He thought about the 14 properties and the quarterly accounts and the long, comfortable machinery of a wealthy life that had been running itself while he supervised it, and about the specific quality of 5 days in Rothbury and then 3 months of fortnightly returns, which was the opposite of the machinery running itself. "Miss Birch," he said. She looked at him with the grey eyes that had assessed him on the first morning and had been assessing him, with accumulating information, ever since. "I have been returning to Rothbury every fortnight," he said, "for 3 months. I have given my solicitor reasons related to the endowment revision, and I have given the village no reason at all. I would like to give you the actual reason." He paused. "The actual reason is that I find your company more clarifying than any other I currently have access to, and that the fortnights between visits are less satisfactory than the visits themselves, and that I have spent a considerable portion of those fortnights thinking about things you have said, and finding that the thinking is useful and the things are worth thinking about." He held her gaze. "I am 34 years old, and I have not said anything like this to anyone in recent memory, which is either relevant or irrelevant, and I am not entirely certain which." Agnes was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the November morning was doing what northern November mornings did, which was to be grey and persistent and entirely unsentimental. "You are a Marquess," she said. It was not an objection. It was the opening of an account. "Yes. I am a schoolmistress in a Durham village with a permanent trustee vote and an endowment and no fortune and no family of consequence." She said this with the directness she brought to all propositions, the refusal to make either more or less of something than it was. "The distance is real. I said so in September." "You did," he said, "and I told you the distance had not altered my intention. It has not." "You came here to close this school," she said again. "Yes." "And stayed." "Yes." because of Thomas Bewley's candle. That was the beginning of it, he said. It was not the reason for the last 3 months. She looked at him across the desk in the November office with the endowment document between them, and he looked back with the full attention he had been giving to this room and this woman for 3 months, and outside the children were arriving for the morning session, and their voices were audible through the stone walls. "I have a question," she said. "Yes." "When you read the composition books," she said, "in September, the first afternoon, you stayed in this office for an hour." "Yes." "Which ones did you read?" He knew this answer precisely. Thomas Bewley's first, then Nell Hartley's, then a girl named Sarah Peel, who had written about her grandmother's death in a way that was very exact. Then a boy named James Carr, who had written about wanting to be a doctor. Then at the end, the one at the bottom of the stack, which had no name on the cover, and which I took to be a student's until I read the handwriting. He held her gaze. "It was yours." She was very still. "You wrote an account," he said, "of the day the foundation opened. In 1812, when you arrived and found the building empty and the first children not yet certain whether they were permitted to come. You wrote about the first child who sat down, a girl of 6, who sat in the exact center of the room and arranged her hands on the desk in front of her and looked at you with an expression you described as, let me see if I have it precisely." He had read it often enough. She looked as though she was ready to learn the world if someone would only show her where to begin. Agnes Birch looked at him across the small desk in the Rothbury Foundation office on a November morning in 1814 and said nothing for a moment that was exactly the right length of moment. "That was at the bottom," she said. "It was," he confirmed. "You read it." "Twice," he said, "in September, several times since." "I wrote it for myself," she said, "not for an inspector." "I know," he said. "That is why it was at the bottom. And that is why I read it twice." He looked at her steadily, with the directness she had taught him by example across 3 months of fortnightly Thursdays. "I came back the following day because of Thomas Bewley's candle, which was the professional reason. I came back the day after that because of what you wrote about the girl who sat in the center of the room and arranged her hands, which was not the professional reason." She looked at the November window, then at the endowment document, then at him. "You should know," she said, "that I will argue with you. About most things." "I know," he said. "You have been arguing with me since September. That was professional disagreement." "It was excellent preparation," he said. Something moved in her face. The full expression held longer this time, the warmth that was not composed and not professional, and was entirely Agnes Birch being entirely herself in the room she had built, and the life she had built, and the moment she had not arranged and was not managing. "You are not what I expected of a Marquess," she said. "You said something similar in September," he said, "about governesses, I think, and expectations." "I said you were not a conventional inspector," she corrected, "which is different." "Is it?" "Marginally," she said. And the ghost of something, the beginning of something, not quite the full smile, but its architecture fully assembled. "Come and see the morning session, my lord. Thomas is presenting his map today, and I would like a second pair of eyes on whether the northern boundary is drawn to scale." "Is it drawn to scale?" "Almost certainly not," she said, "but the spirit is excellent." He followed her out of the office and into the classroom, where 37 of 40 children were settling into their benches, and Thomas Bewley was at the front of the room with the cartridge paper map and the expression of a 7-year-old about to do something he had been waiting a week to do, and Agnes Birch went to the front of the room and said, "Children, we have a guest this morning who is going to tell us whether Thomas's map is accurate," and 39 faces turned to look at Rothwell with the various expressions of children encountering a new variable, and Thomas Bewley said, without preamble, "My lord, is the northern boundary of Durham County here or here?" pointing to 2 positions on the map that were approximately an inch apart. Rothwell came to stand beside the map. He looked at it with genuine attention. "There," he said, pointing to one of the positions. "The boundary follows the river from this point, not the road." Thomas Bewley absorbed this, made a correction with the stub of pencil he was carrying, and said, "Thank you." He then turned to Agnes Birch with the expression of a child ready for the next thing. "Miss Birch, is the river correct now?" "Much better," she said. "Begin." Thomas Bewley presented his map with the confidence of a 7-year-old cartographer who has been corrected by a Marquess and has incorporated the correction and is proceeding, and Agnes Birch stood at the side of the room and Rothwell stood beside her, and the morning session began in the Rothbury Foundation on a November Thursday in exactly the way it began every Thursday, except that it was also entirely different, and the 37, 40 children could feel the difference in the room's quality without being able to name it, which was the way most real things were felt. He proposed in December in the office in the half-hour before the afternoon session. It was, as proposals went, not particularly ceremonial. He had the sense that ceremony with Agnes Birch was a form of management, and that she would receive the honest version better than the theatrical one, which meant plain words, direct gaze, no preamble. He told her that he had been thinking since September about what his life had been before Rothbury and what it was afterward, and that the most significant difference was the quality of the thinking he did in the fortnights between Thursdays, which was sharper and more directed and more honest than the thinking he had done before, and that he attributed this to the specific influence of a woman who had handed him a child's composition book instead of a financial prospectus, and had meant what she said about effective and honest being different things. He told her that the distance between Marquess and schoolmistress was real, and that he did not intend to pretend otherwise, but that the distance was a fact of position and not a fact of character, and that character was the thing he had been assessing for 3 months and had found, in precise and specific terms, across 40 Thursdays and 1 Sunday service, and 4 afternoon sessions, and several arguments about the enclosure of the southern field, and one memorable disagreement about whether Thomas Bewley should be permitted to try the older children's arithmetic, to be entirely, specifically worth it. Agnes Birch listened to all of it. She sat across the desk with her hands folded, and she listened the way she listened to everything, with the full attention that was her manner in the presence of things that required it, which was most things. And when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The disagreement about the arithmetic," she said. "Yes." "I was right," she said. "He was ready." "I was aware of that by the end of the disagreement," he said. "I was not aware of it at the beginning, which was why it was a disagreement." "You concede gracefully," she said. "You correct without triumph," he said. "Which is rarer." She looked at the desk between them, and then at him, and the full expression was there, not the beginning of it, not the architecture of it, but the completed version, warm and direct, and entirely itself, Agnes Birch in the room she had built on a December Thursday with the children arriving in 20 minutes, and the endowment signed, and the foundation permanent, and the moment exactly this. "The foundation will be spoken of," she said. "Yes. People will have opinions about a Marquess and a schoolmistress." "They will," he said. "They have been having opinions about my presence in Rothbury since October. The increment from visiting regularly to intending to marry will be manageable." "I am not concerned about manageable," she said. "I am telling you that I will not be managed by the opinions, that I will continue to run this school and make my own decisions about it and argue with you when I disagree with your decisions about other things." "I know," he said. "This is not a condition. This is a description of what I am asking to be part of." She looked at him for a long moment with the grey eyes that had assessed him in the doorway on a September Thursday and had been building a case ever since. He sat across the desk from her and let the assessment complete, because it was her method and he had learned to trust her methods. "Yes," she said, plain, direct, the whole answer requiring nothing added. "Yes," he said, The wedding took place in the Rothbury church in March, in a service attended by the village with the unified enthusiasm of a community that had been watching the situation develop since October and had been in complete agreement about the appropriate outcome since November. Hartley attended with the careful expression of a solicitor who had managed the legal arrangements for a Marquess's marriage to a schoolmistress and found the documents entirely in order. The foundation's trustees attended and shook hands with both parties with the warmth of people who understood that the morning's ceremony had made the foundation permanently safe in ways that the endowment alone could not. Thomas Bewley attended because Agnes had told him he might, on the condition that he remained in his seat throughout. He remained in his seat throughout, and was observed by the village to produce and consult a map of the church during the service, which the village found entirely appropriate. Nell Hartley attended and sat in the second row, and afterward told Agnes, with the composed directness of a 12-year-old who had learned her directness from somewhere specific, that she was glad and had known it would happen. Agnes had asked her when she had known. Nell had said, when he read the composition books. Agnes had said, that was the first day. Nell had said, yes, in the tone of a girl who saw no reason why this required elaboration. After the service, on the village green in the March morning, the 40 children of the Rothbury Foundation presented a map. Large, carefully drawn, weeks in the making, covering the county from the coast to the moors, with a small flag placed at Rothbury and a notation that read, in Thomas Bewley's hand, here and below it, in the combined handwriting of 40 children who had been given the same assignment. Here is where we began to learn the world. Agnes received it with the composure she brought to everything, which is to say she received it completely and did not perform around it, and was, for a moment, entirely without the professional register, was simply herself, holding a map made by 40 children, standing on the Rothbury Green in March with the man who had arrived to close the school in September and had not left. Rothwell looked at the map and at the notation and at the flag placed at Rothbury, and thought about Thomas Bewley's candle in the dark and the girl who had sat in the centre of the room and arranged her hands on the desk and looked ready to learn the world if someone would show her where to begin, and thought about what it was to arrive somewhere expecting to end a thing and to find instead the beginning of the only thing that had ever shown him, with the full and honest clarity of a composition book, where to begin. He looked at Agnes. She looked at the map. Then she looked at him, and the expression was the full one, the real one, the warm one, the one he had been watching accumulate across a September and an October and a November and a December and now a March, and she said, in the plain register that was her truest voice, he drew the northern boundary correctly this time. He did, Rothwell said. He has been practicing, she said. So have I, he said. The March morning did what March mornings in Durham did, remained uncommitted on the question of winter versus spring, grey and bright by turns, honest about the difficulty of the transition, and the village green was full of 40 children, and one solicitor and various trustees, and the general contented noise of a thing concluded well, and Agnes Birch, who was now Agnes Tremaine, who was still and entirely Agnes Birch, stood on the green with her map, and was simply, precisely, irreducibly herself. As, at last, was he. My dear listener, I thank you most sincerely for keeping company with this tender tale of the heart. It is my fondest hope that this Regency romance has brought you a measure of comfort, delight, and quiet reflection, as our dear characters journeyed through sorrow, hope, devotion, and the promise of enduring love. If this clean historical romance has pleased you, I would be most grateful if you would offer a like, leave a kind comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming Regency love stories and audiobooks. Until we meet again, may your days be gentle and your heart well supplied with happily ever afters.